Dr. Bill Adams here, and do we have a show for you today? We're going to talk about the FDA committee meeting fresh from Washington, D.C. So we got some great experts to share their opinions and insights. We've got Dr. Mindy Hawes from Nashville, Tennessee, Nash Vegas as we call
Nash
it
Vegas.
in the biz, and Dr. Jason Posner from Boca Raton, Florida, and last but not least, Dr. Dustin Reed from Austin, Texas, fellow Texan. Mindy, I'm gonna start with you because you and I were there at the meeting together. It was very interesting. There's a lot of things discussed, but I thought we would talk about three things. And this is now every 2 years through Obamacare and the 21st Century Cures Act. There needs to be all the subsections, medical device subsections, the FDA will meet with all the stakeholders to discuss the medical devices. And so this was the first that we've had of these Q2 year meetings. The last committee meeting we had in plastic surgery was 2011. Multiple things we're talking about. We're going to talk about breast implant ALCL, and then breast implant surveillance, MRIs, and other modalities, and then breast implant illness. So Mindy, why don't you lead us off just with the general your gestalt of the meeting, and then let's start in with breast implant ALCL.
You know, number one, it was fascinating to see the process, to see the FDA process, to see the panel at work. They held their discussions about each point in front of all of us. And Bill and I, as well as many other members of the Aesthetic Society, testified on the public side of the barricade with other members of the public, women who had BIA-ALCL, women who claimed to have BII, and others. So it was a really interesting experience, and I feel like testifying on this side of the barricade, we actually were able to develop relationships with some of those women and have a much better exchange for a collaborative community.
You know, in the breast implant ALCL section of the meeting, there's a lot discussed, and you know, we came out a little bit where I think a lot of us believe that technique's a very important part of this and minimizing bacterial contamination or the bacterial load at the time of surgery. I think there's very good data to support that, but I think there was some noise that kind of maybe minimized that a little bit, but I think technique matters. So Mindy, what do you think? What kind of comments do you have on that?
You know, I think technique does matter. While we don't completely understand the BIA-ALCL, we do know bacteria is playing some kind of a role. Therefore, technique matters because you want to lower the bacterial load. It was difficult sitting there in that room and listening to these women who had been diagnosed early with BIA-ALCL before people knew what it was. And so to hear their struggle to be patient 2 or patient 3 of a new emerging illness is a big problem. And it's thankfully we've educated people enough now that people I think are getting diagnosed earlier, but absolutely technique matters. You can't have a bacterially mediated or bacteria involved illness that technique can't matter.
And the reason we believe that very strongly is just because of the epidemiology and the case clusters. There's actually been at least 13 case clusters around the world, which really follows an infectious type trigger that you would see for that type of modality. Mindy, you mentioned awareness. You know, Jason, awareness is definitely key with breast implant ALCL. That was certainly discussed at this FDA meeting. Why don't you make a few comments about that?
One is, we've discussed this previously. I practice in Florida. It's a big smooth implant state. So we really, I've never seen a case of this, although in cases where people come in with late onset seromas, we definitely worry about it and think about it. But thank God I've never seen a case. And I'm hoping I never will. But, it's taught us a lot about, as you said, technique. And, my question to you guys is, obviously we've seen patients with late onset capsular contracture where, they're fine for 5 years and they get a tooth abscess and then they get a capsular contracture. So the question is, if you're getting contamination of the implant pocket with these textured implants, are certain women more susceptible? Do certain infectious etiologies more susceptible? Is it teeth related? Is it gut related, bacteria, or breast related? I think we just don't know because there are so few cases of this. It's hard to kind of be Sherlock Holmes and figure it all out. I think, unfortunately, it's going to take time. but we certainly know some of the inciting factors, such as the more aggressively textured implants are worse with this than some of the less. But I'd like to really figure out, based on the cases, well, how long did it take to get this, and were there any inciting factors? And I don't think we've touched upon that yet.
And really, we weren't keeping good records. I mean, I look back at operative notes from 15 years ago, and you may have dictated you took out an implant and whether it was collapsed or intact, but you didn't necessarily, and the manufacturer, if it was written on it, you didn't necessarily comment if it was smooth or textured. Sometimes the shell was eroded, it was hard to tell. But ends up, that's important. So I think it's changing our record keeping and that we're more astute and paying attention to things.
Dustin, what comments do you have?
A couple comments I wanted to make was I found it very interesting. As you know, my partner, Dr. Gordon, was at the meeting, and she commented about those early cases of ALCL and how sad it was to hear those women tell those stories. And it really resonated with me about how important it is to listen to patients and not to just be dismissive of their complaints. And you know, as new things arise and new things come along, it really is important to listen to them. And I think that's a lot of frustration that these and other patients have, is sometimes they just really feel like they kind of got dismissed or blown off and just didn't get listened to. And then the second point I wanted to make, you keep driving home the point that technique matters. That and what was determined at the meeting, or was it discussed, like who should be doing this operation? Who is there a point that we should be making about training about using implants and the importance of sterile technique and potentially using Keller funnel? Like, did that point get made? Who should be doing the operation?
Yeah, I think it was definitely what you're talking about, Dustin, is salient, because the thing is that we all know, we all went through accredited training programs. We went through general surgery training, plastic surgery training, and even after you get done with 6 or 7 years of training, you're still learning. You're still learning and going to practice, and there's no way when you're going to get sufficient training to do these type of procedures in a weekend course, or some of the people that don't have any formal surgical training. So that was discussed actually quite a bit.
I mean, all of us who are members of Plastic Surgery Channel are very involved with our societies and lecturing and FDA and all this stuff. But so many of our colleagues don't go to meetings. They may not be up on current techniques. I mean, I think this is something that the public, there's certain guys I never see at meetings, and we always see the same people at the meetings listening to the lectures and want to learn. So even in our specialty, I think there are people who stay up on things and those who don't.
You know, the FDA wanted to talk about that and wanted to talk about the different ways of education. And they wanted to know about different ways to educate patients, but also what are the different ways the society is using to educate our members. Because to your point, Jason, if somebody comes to one meeting every 3 years and that's the only place they're learning about BIA ALCL, you can miss a lot. And so we talked about the society sending e-blasts, the webinars, radar, the online journals, but I think it's really important.
We actually, one of our testimonies, we talked about that they don't, the commercial airlines don't hire new drone pilots to fly commercial jets. They have to go through defined training, because if you don't have the right training, then you're going to have bad outcomes. And there's nothing different than that in plastic surgery. And I think that the FDA heard that testimony. So we're hopeful that that will be one thing that maybe comes out of their final analysis, and maybe trying to regulate. We've talked about this a lot on No Spin Live, that we think it's up to the government to protect the people, and to have people using devices that aren't trained, and it's very easy to show that. I think it's a problem. So hopefully they're going to hear us, and they're going to make some sort of decision that would help with that. The next thing, which I think was a big item at the FDA meeting, is that the panel recommended that the FDA drop the MRI recommendation, which has been women should get an MRI at 3 years, and then every other year after that for asymptomatic patients, and consider some other modalities such as high-resolution ultrasound, which I think we're all fairly excited about. Mindy, why don't you make some comments?
Recently, after talking with Bill and other members like Brad Bingston and Pat McGuire, we recently acquired a high-resolution ultrasound unit in our office. And it's amazing how much you learn quickly about what an intact shell looks like. It's also amazing how much more comforted the patient is by me or my nurse running an ultrasound versus having to go wait for an MRI, let alone the cost effectiveness, the time effectiveness of it. I think it's important. This is asymptomatic patients. We all know MRI is fantastic. It's better than mammogram for picking up breast cancer. But we don't send every patient to get a screening MRI for breast cancer. We do the less expensive, not quite as sensitive, but good enough mammogram for women yearly. Why are we not doing high resolution ultrasound for asymptomatic women who have implants, especially since those implants or those ultrasounds, unlike mammogram, are not getting covered by insurance?
All right, and then the other topic was you just did a deep dive on PSC. We've done deep dives with our patient groups, and I think we made some really great alliances over the past year. We've done breast implant LCL with 3 great BIALCL advocates, and then we just did a breast implant illness, the one that Mindy hosted. So why don't you lead us through what was discussed at the FDA meeting on breast implant illness?
The breast implant illness groups, and there's several of them. There's the breast implant victims advocacy group. There's another Healing My Breast Implant Illness group. The ones we met with Bill in the deep dive with the breast implant victims advocacy group. Very smart, very intelligent, very articulate women who honestly will stake a claim that they felt terrible until they had their implants removed. They had Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and while that stayed around, their other symptoms went away. So when we got to the FDA, there were many of those women. There were also more outliers that it was harder to listen to. One woman shaking her implants overhead with her glove, holding them with a gloved hand about the toxic bags of poison. But we owe our patients to look at it, right? We've looked at connective tissue diseases. We've looked at rheumatoid arthritis. BIA-ALCL didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. We didn't know about it. So why would it be such a stretch that there could be some small percentage of patients that do have some sort of inflammatory trigger from their breast implants? And again, this could all be bacterially mediated, which would be fascinating, I think, with our new ASERF studies to look at. Just like with the BIA-ALCL, is there a new bacterial trigger in the biofilms around these implants?
I feel like I'm not saying I think I don't know what to think about breast implant illness.
I don't either.
But I will say that right now, the main thing is that patients just feel like we won't listen to them. And I feel like the ALCL group was there 15 years ago. Like, they came to see their doctors and we would just dismiss any concern they had. If we did operate on them, like we kind of willy-nilly did who knows what. And that's the frustration for them. And now, like you said, they've been convinced, and I mean convinced, by a small subset of surgeons that if they don't get every ounce of that capsule out, then they're still going to be sick. And like, I just can't believe that that's true. And as you know, like, that's not safe sometimes. And
no, it's not safe.
And I don't think that that's going to be the answer, but we need to listen to them. And I agree. Like, I mean, we need to look at it. Like, we need to scientifically decide if it's real or if
Absolutely.
It's not just dismiss that it's not real.
Well, the good thing is that at the FDA meeting, another one of our presentations spoke to there's actually 2 ASERF studies that have been funded and are being kind of refined, the protocols finalized, but they're studying the things you guys are alluding to. So I think that's going to help better define breast implant illness. There's a big push to data collection at this meeting. And as you all know, and this is another presentation out of the hour and 22 minutes that we presented through the Aesthetic Society. A few were on the aesthetic neural network, okay, which is something that's been developed over the past 3 years, but it will take longitudinal data collection to the next level, and it's really something like that is what we need to follow these people over time. And I totally agree with you, Dustin. We've learned that from working with our patient groups over the past year, that they're actually we can learn together on a lot of these things, and so they want collecting data in a uniform way that can be done long term is what. That's going to be one solution that Anne will provide, and that was actually recognized by the FDA as being very novel.
And we need to get more people to be in that implant registry.
Yeah. I talked to several of the women from the advocacy group who had their concerns with the National Breast Implant Registry with ASPS is that it only collects from here forward. And so those women are talking about, but I've got friends who've had implants for 10 years. What about them? The beautiful thing about Anne, and we're currently working so that Anne can pull data out of our EMRs, and it can feed that data to the National Breast Implant Registry. But Anne can work retrograde, right? We've pulled data from back as far as 2000. So we decide something's important that we didn't know was important, kind of like texturing has turned out, and the type of texturing especially. We can go back with Anne and look. It's not dependent on people data inputting it right now and forward.
Yeah, it's the issue. Everybody agrees registries are great. The problem is, and this has been the Achilles heel of registries, it requires data entry, and that's been the failure of countless registries that have been started. So that's why this aesthetic neural network, or ANN, is so novel, because it's what we call frictionless data collection. So not only can it go retrospectively extracting retrospective data, it can extract current data so you don't have to enter it. And then there is going to have to be some data entry, because you've got to be able to customize things. But if you can go in the OR and scan your implant label, and it pulls that information off, and then you can quickly, in a pre-populated template, make any little changes about what you did in the operating room, that may take you 15 seconds. And I think that's very palatable, and that's the way of the future. And so that's where we're headed. So listen, we could talk about this all night, but but those are some awesome insights. I'm sure our viewers enjoyed it. And if you want to see more of this, you can see it on theplasticsurgerychannel.com.